welcome everybody. First of all, I'm Danielle Ramirez with Quiet Storm Services. It's a publishing company that opened up a couple of years ago with a mission to empower writers and impact community. I won't talk a whole bunch about myself, but I have about 15 years experience in substance use prevention, community organizing, really bringing people together for good. So when I opened up our publishing process last year, and I got a chance to talk with Dakotah and read his story and his manuscript at that time. I was overcome with an honor to be able to publish his book. And that is not only because it's a good book and it's a good story, but because of the way that he opens up about his history is requiring extreme bravery. We know we live in a world where fear is plentiful. So for somebody to step up and to put their words onto paper is a really big deal. So since I read through it and we've been working together, it has just been a series of learning and fun, and getting to even know some things about Dakotah behind the scenes and his journey with substance abuse and addiction and all that, but really his journey as a human being, and he's not willing to stay down. And I think that speaks very loudly to the testament of the human spirit that we can all identify with. That's not just offense special to Dakotah, but we can all accompany that. And I think his book does a really good job to be able to inspire that connection between people, because it's so needed these days. So, okay, Dakotah, it's all yours. Let's give him a round of applause.
Hello, I'm Dakotah. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I never really meant to write a book. Everybody asks me, when did you decide that you wanted to write a book? And I didn't ever decide that I really wanted to write a book. It just happened through a series of events that was undeniable in my mind for me to not write the book, right? So the process of writing for me it started with a distaste for social media and Facebook and the way that people treat each other on these social media platforms. It's the assassination of character and not logic and reason and facts that win arguments. And I just got really tired of that, so I deleted my Facebook. And when I deleted my Facebook, I was confronted with the amount of time that I really spent on Facebook when it wasn't there anymore. And so I was like, I don't really know what to do with this time. And so a friend of mine, Seth Dewey's in the audience, recommended to read The Courage to Create by Rollo May. And this book breaks down the creative process in a psychological sense and a philosophical sense. And I'm a sucker for philosophy, so in this book it talks about how the greatest writers, poets, actors, painters, people that we consider geniuses, every single one of them believes their work isn't any good, right? Because that is an act of vulnerability. When you take something that exists only within yourself and you bring it to reality for other people to experience and to critique and comment on and all those things, it's an act of vulnerability. So there's this burn inside of yourself that most people shy away from when they feel that, because they're not consciously aware of that. And so I'm like, man, these geniuses feel like their work's no good, and maybe there's something to that. And so when I was in my active addiction growing up, I was very good at painting. I was very good at drawing and graffiti and all of that. But when I got clean, I lost that. I didn't have the ability to draw anymore. It was something that stayed with my addiction. And so I wanted to be creative after I read this book. I was inspired to be creative. And so I wrote some stuff. I was thinking like a philosophical format. And so I just typed some stuff out on my phone, and I was like, man, that sounds kind of cool, I was like, all right. So I sent it to my buddy Seth, and I was like, what do you think of this? It had no purpose. There was no format to it. There was like There was no description or anything. I was just writing, and he was like, "Man, this is really good. It sounds like a memoir." And I was like, "Oh God, that's don't say that." And I was like, I just disregarded that. I kept writing. I wrote about 10 pages. When I was in the 4th grade, I was given a compliment about my writing, and for those of you who have read my book, that you know that there was not a whole lot of compliments floating around me at that time. Excuse me. And she's also in the audience too, Tammy Gilly, thank you. She was one that gave me the compliment. She acted like I walked on water or something because I wrote a book within a book, and it's like some complex stuff for a 4th grader to do, I suppose. And so I held on to that my whole life, and when I got into college and was going through all my writing classes and all that, my teachers and professors would tell me, "You should write a book, you have a really good voice for it." And I was like, that's crazy to say, but no thank you. And so fast forward, I wrote those 4 pages, Seth commented on it. I had a surgery, and the next day I didn't have anything to do, and so I decided on a whim to go to Dillon Nature Center, which is a place in Hutchins, Kansas. And I had just graduated with my associate's degree, and I ran into Tammy there, my 4th grade teacher. And so I tell her, how my whole life turned out, all this crazy stuff that I went through, and that I just graduated college, and I'm married to the love of my life, I got 4 kids, I'm stable, I'm doing good things in my life now. And I was like, actually, and so I told her about how I've held on to that compliment she gave me my whole life, and if she would like to see how my writing has evolved since 4th grade, it should be a good amount of, and so she agreed to. And she sat down right there in, Dillon Nature Center and read about 10 pages that I had typed on my phone. And she was like, "This writing is phenomenal, Dakotah." And I was like, "Oh, thank you." And she was like, "Actually, I am the president of the Authors Club of the state of Kansas, and I have a lot of connections that could help you, through this process. So if you complete a project," she's like, "Here, take my phone number. If you complete a project, get a hold of me." And so then I was like, "Man, what? That is crazy." And so, I was talking to my buddy Steph, I was like, "Man, I can't really fathom writing a book about myself, I feel so, self-centered, conceited or something." He's like, "It's not about you." He's like, "Think how many people have been through similar situations, and think about how many people don't have the ability to tell their story, And he's like, "So, maybe take yourself out of the center of it." So I started thinking about it, I was like, "Man, I do have the ability, apparently, from what people have told me." So I was like, "All right, man." And the superpower of an addict is the ability to hyper-focus, right? And so I just started obsessing. And I put down 40,000 words on my phone. I just and then transferred it to a computer and spent another month going through it. And I finished finished my book and writing in about 3 months. And then I, called her, hit her up, and she was my first reader and went through and edited it. And she told me that it was really good. And then we went through the process of trying to figure out what to do with it. Because we talked to a local publisher, and he was like, I don't have the resources to back this book of it, and he's like, "I think this book has a lot of potential, and I don't want to be the reason that it fails." So then I'm like, "What does that even mean?" I'm like, "What do I do with it? What are you talking about?" And through the grapevine and trial and error, I found my way to Danielle and submitted my work to Quiet Storm Services, and then I was picked out of that submission competition, and then the book got published. And it's really kind of just taking a life of its own. I couldn't have planned all of this stuff more perfectly, other than what life has just directed me through. And I've just basically been holding on for dear life and trying to make my way through the chaos. My whole life is built around helping people. When I made it to the other side of my addiction and all the abuse, and started healing and working through all of my trauma and all those things, I realized how much of it was my own mental prison. All these things have been told to me, that I was worthless and that I couldn't do this or that and yada yada yada. And basically from a young age, my whole life was spent validating all of the negativity that was told to me, you know, and eventually I just kind of like, you know, I woke up and was like, man, this isn't fun anymore. This is terrible, you know. And I was looking at 110 months in prison, and I got an opportunity. You know, the inmates bonded me out of jail, which that doesn't happen either, you know. And I ran straight to Oxford House, and I haven't looked back since. You know, I always told myself if I had some distance between me and my addiction, because I started using it at the age of 8. You know, and it's all I ever known is drug use. And you know, anytime that there was an unwanted emotion, I would use about it. You know, like I would have to suffocate it, and suppress it, and push it down because I didn't want to feel those ways. And substances gave me the control to not feel those ways, but they don't go nowhere. You're not getting rid of them. You're just prolonging them. You know, and so when I got the opportunity to separate myself from that, I developed a passion to help people. You know what I mean? And so I started going to school and I started working with people in the recovery community, and then I graduated from HCC and switched to Fort Hays, and then I got into the mental health field, and I work with the Serve Community Treatment Team now, which is the Serve Community Treatment Team. And basically what we are and what we do is we're frontline business to the mental health crisis right now. We are in the streets working with people who have severe and persistent mental illness. We're checking underneath bridges. We are working with homeless people. We're helping people find housing, connecting them to local resources. We're helping them develop new coping strategies. And I mean, it's phenomenal. I feel like I'm in the streets, but like not in the streets as well, you know what I mean? So I appreciate being in the trenches because that's my people, you know what I mean? That's who I relate with, that's who I know, and I understand exactly where they're at for the most part. And so I think the messenger matters, right? It matters that I've been there, you know, in that sense. Maybe not exactly, but emotions aren't an individual experience. They are universal. Everybody experiences the same emotions, regardless of the ignition point that started the emotions. We all experience the same emotions. And, you know, so with that, I think the messenger matters, you know, and I've been able to build rapport with people who haven't found success in therapy for years, you know, just because they're like, no way, dude, you just sell me dope. And but now they see me, and so, you know, I think that matters. And I'm just grateful to be here, man. You know, my mom and my sister are in the audience. We give them a round of applause. We've really been doing that. Not really something to do, but it's just amazing for us all to be sitting in this situation right now at this point in time, because I guarantee you, if we lined up everybody's trauma in here, it would stretch for miles. You know, I imagine that we've all been through a lot of things, and you know, to exist right now in this particular point in time together, you know, with my book, it's just that's what it's really all about, right? Connection. You know, a lot of times our problems convince us to isolate and feel alone, but we're all human beings. You know what I mean? So how is that truly possible to be alone, other than the mental prisons that you place on yourself and isolate yourself, you know what I mean? So I think it's just pretty amazing that we're all sitting right here. And that's really all I have to say, so we'll open the floor up for questions now.
So Dakotah, that's what you're doing with the people under the bridge, and that's called liberation theology. That's what you take your story and practice it on the streets.
Really? Okay.
Good for you, bro.
I'm gonna have to dig into that.
That's really cool stuff.
Appreciate that. Thanks, sir.
What you're doing is really great. Great message.
Any other questions? So,
What was the hardest chapter you had to write, and how did you go through the process of bringing the emotion up for that chapter?
how many people in here have read my book? Okay, we got a little work to do in here. That's all right. That's all right. So
Can you repeat the question?
Oh yes. What was the hardest chapter for me to write, and how did I bring up the emotion to put into the book? Guitars and eyeliner was the most difficult chapter for me to write. It's actually a happy chapter. as far as suffering and pain goes, I'm super good at it. You know what I mean? Like I can suffer and I can be in pain real good. But to be happy, that's a difficult task for me because my life hasn't been spent in the majority of happiness. And guitars and eyeliner, I talk about a memory with my father. Him and my mother were breaking up, and it was the first time that I ever seen him softened as a human being, and not this rage-filled, maniacal man. But he was softened. I could tell that he was in pain, he was crying, and he was packing his stuff up. And in the back of my mind, I wanted him to leave, right? Because obviously I know what it's like to have him there. I know that it's not any good for any of us. And but at the same time, it was like witnessing not my father in pain, but like another human being. You know what I mean? So in that moment, like I set my stuff aside, and I cried with him, you know. And he had a guitar, had a lot of dust on it, and I was looking at it, and he seen me being curious about it, so he pulled it out and played it for me. He played the blues, and it was a very deep and vulnerable, connecting moment for me and him. And the reason why that chapter was so difficult to write is because I was confronted once again with the reality that my father is always going to be who he is, right? The mental health problems he struggles with, there's not a whole lot of chance for hope unless somebody is very serious about wanting it, and for him that's not the case. And so when I was writing that chapter, it was almost like mourning every possibility and every potential that he could have been but wasn't, you know. And so I'm what you call a chronic optimistic. You know, and I still hold out for him, you know what I mean, to this day. There is no contact. I've blocked him as of this last year because at some point in time I have to accept what it is and hop off the merry-go-round, and it's not my job to fix him, although, you know, the whole psychology path was kind of inspired by him, because I wanted to know what was that? You know what I mean? What was that about? You know, and so I needed to understand that. I needed to read and learn about that. And so that was the hardest chapter. That one I cried a lot when I was writing it, and it was just because it's the father I'm never going to have, you know what I mean? And luckily for my kids, I get to be what I never got to have, and so I guess that's how the universe reconciles situations like that. Next question. Go ahead, Ted.
How long were you sober before this chain of events started happening?
The book?
Yeah.
So how long was I sober before the chain of events for the book started? 6 years. My clean date is September 1st, 2017. So I'm almost 7 years clean. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you mentioned a very influential educator in your past. I wondered if you have any messages for current educators in the trenches right now.
Okay, so do I have any, say that again?
Do you have any requests or messages to pass on to
Okay.
people
Do
who
I have
are
any
working with
messages?
kids like you?
For educators, for people like me. Your problem childs are the ones who need the most love, you know, and they're the most difficult to love. I won't make any excuses about it. I was not a fun kid to have. God bless my mother's soul. But if you've read that book, you know I'm not a fun kid to have, but there's reasons for that, right? Another thing I would tell you is if you don't have concrete evidence of abuse that will hold up in a court, I know you're mandatory reporters, but don't, because it will cause much more problems. And it's been my experience, document them until you have some concrete evidence. and even talk to somebody if you need to, but do not fire that gun unless unless you're prepared and you're going to be able to get that kid out of there, because it made my life a lot worse, you know. And so just love them. You never know what a small act of kindness will do. You know what I mean? I mean, look what a small act of kindness grew into today. It just took a little while for it to grow. You know what I mean? But here we are. Any other questions?
So what surprised you the most throughout this process?
So what surprised me the most throughout this process? People's response to it. I'm gonna be honest. I thought that I was gonna fall somewhere like in between, you know, like super extreme and then perfect life. I thought I was gonna fall somewhere in here, and some of the people's responses to the stuff is like, well, maybe it's a little more worse than I thought. You know what I mean? But also besides that, I think that one of my favorite comments on this book that has been given to me is. Somebody told me that they've been through similar things in their life, but they were unable to find the words to describe what had gone on in their lives. And my ability to describe what was going on at that time made that individual connect to those emotions of his past. And he's also in the room right now, Dylan, my guy. And you know, I feel like that's the most important part, right? Because that circles back to the beginning of why should I write a book about myself, and that's because I have the ability to do that, right? And so I hope in some way that's liberating, you know, internally for people. And also, you know, when you go through all these types of things and you isolate and you feel alone, you feel like you're the worst being that could ever be, or the worst things that ever happened to you, you know, nobody could understand, yada yada, and then you read something, you're like, oh, maybe I'm not alone. You know what I mean? So it also makes you not feel so crazy. You know what I mean? Because I got to touch the cycle, I'm not going to lie. But I've worked really hard to learn how to navigate that appropriately. You know what I mean? So, any more questions?
So were you able to put everything all in one book?
No. So was I able to put everything all in one book? And the answer to that question is no. This is part 1 of 2. Hopefully I fit it in 2. But we're just going to say that for situational. But anyway, this is the development of my addiction, right? These are all the things that went into creating my identity, my relationship with the world, and my character, and my ways of thinking, right? And so, which ultimately led me to the streets. You know, people see people riding around high on a bike, and they're like, oh, well, maybe that guy, you know? But really, do you ever ask, how'd you get there? You know what I mean? What put you into that place? What drove you so far off into Neverland, you know what I mean, that you don't care about society or, you know, or anything like that anymore. You've completely disconnected yourself from society. How did you get there? You know, there is pre-steps that take place before a disease is created, before the disease is created, you know what I mean? And it's not this black and white moral failing or disease or choice, you know, this is a very complex process in a lot of cases, not all, but in a lot of cases. And so my goal is to show how that comes, how somebody develops into that. So,
Writing your memoir autobiography, you know, there's a lot of people, sometimes we have grievances toward, right? And there's people that, you know, might be implicated in the book, right, in your writing, and was it hard to delineate who gets brought up, what gets brought up, and, you know, are they going to recognize that, or, you know, how did you manage that?
So how did I manage putting real people into the book without basically outing them?
Yeah, anonymously or whatever, even though.
I changed names and details to some settings and situations. All situations happen, but some of the settings may be a little altered.
Did you have grievances though, you know, that were there, and that was part of the healing process, or part of it maybe hard to?
Did I have any grievances? So I had about a 5-hour-long conversation with my father on the phone. And I told him every single thing that's in this book, because I don't want to be sneaky about it.
Yeah,
you know
good.
what I mean? Like, this is what happens regardless of if you have the ability to take accountability for your actions or not. or if you have distorted reality so deeply in your mind over the course of time that you have forgotten. But as a kid, I was unable to say, no, this is what happened.
This is the way this impacted.
This is the way it impacts me. This is what happened. No, I'm an adult now.
Yeah.
And so we spent about 5 hours on the merry-go-round of him trying to convince me that it never happened. And I'm like, bro, I was there. You know what I'm saying? What do you mean that didn't happen? I was there, and so was my family and everybody else. You know, and so, which kind of pushed my father to the edge, and you could call it a psychotic break or whatever it was. But he went on a big rampage on Facebook, basically just dragging me through the mud and talking about how I'm worthless, and he's known that I was worthless since the age of 8, and we're also Native American, so he's used the culture to manipulate me a lot. You know, he's like, the council told him to abandon me because I chose to be a white man. What other crazy stuff did he say? That's the sum of it. You know, the post was about this long.
You had the courage to be vulnerable, and he never.
No, right. And you know, and here's the thing, right, is that no child wants to be at odds with their parent, right? And running back to the chronic optimistic, till this day, regardless of whatever's happened in that book, if we could sit down and have a real conversation of accountability with an apology, that's it for me. We can continue a relationship for whatever we can do, you know what I mean? Because I don't want to be at odds, you know what I mean? I don't want this to be the reality of it, but it just is what it is, you know what I mean? And so I'm going to talk about it, I'm going to speak up, you know, good. I'm an adult now, I can't do nothing about it. But there was a period of time where he was very supportive of it when he didn't believe that I could do it. He didn't believe I could do it. And so he signed an agreement for me to be able to use him and his name in the book. And so I covered my bases there. But when it popped off and it really started growing, that's when he wasn't so happy about that. And he's still not happy about it. But, let's be adults here. We can take accountability. I'm not perfect. My next book will be a whole book of accountability for all the wrong that I've done. You know what I mean? In the most respectful way for the people that I've hurt.
So it was your attempt at reconciliation, really, right, with him, and it failed from being reciprocated.
It was a failed reciprocation of reconciliation, yes. Unfortunately.
I have a question. I can tell with your family being here how encouraging you are. That's a beautiful thing. But was it hard in the process of putting all this dirty laundry, so to speak, on paper? Did many suffer through with you during that process, or?
Was it difficult for me to put all this dirty laundry on paper, and did we suffer? Yes, I think so, because I also had to sit down with my family and tell them everything that was going to be in the book, you know, and once again, God bless my mother, she read it, and it was a difficult read, you know, because there's things there that perhaps time has blocked out of your mind, and, you know, and but at the end of the day, they all understand what I'm trying to do. This isn't like a, hey, look at me type of thing. This is like, hey, man, there's some problems. We need to talk about it. You know what I mean? We need to show people that you can talk about it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to die. I'm here to talk about emotions. It might be a little uncomfortable, but I ain't going to die. You know what I mean? And that's the way, you know, that it really is. It's the fear and the anticipation of fear that keeps you locked into it, you know, and not talking about it. And, you know, you look at the suicide rate for men right now, and it's atrocious, terrible, it's tragic, you know, and they just talk about it, you know, some people just talk about it, you know, and when we think about talking about it, we think of, you know, men think of, you know, soft and weak and, you know, all these things. Well, I fight competitively, you know what I mean? Like, I have the ability to be vulnerable and to be soft, but I also have the ability to be strong and to be violent and all these things, you know what I mean? There's many facets of the human being, and we aren't just capable of pure strength or pure vulnerability. You know what I mean? We're a multi-dimensional being, and so I hope I can set an example that hopefully liberates somebody from their own.
And it was probably healing for all of you. Yes.
I hope so. It was for me. I'd like to say it was, but that'd be an assumption. Any other questions?
Add to that, how would you say personally you've, I guess, been transformed by just taking back your pen and giving the final word to those experiences that you went through?
How would I say that I've been transformed through my writing?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, it was pretty intense when it came out, you know what I mean? And the months leading up, I'm like, oh my God, people are really going to read all this stuff about me, you know? And I'm like, whew. I guess it would be liberating, you know what I mean? Because what I expected and what would happen are two different things, you know what I mean? And it's only been out a month, so there's still some room for some other things to take place, but I felt freed, you know what I mean? Like
Liberated.
you know, I feel liberated. Yeah, you know, there's some things in there that brought me a lot of shame and guilt that weren't my shame and guilt to carry.
Exactly.
You know, and I carried some weight for some adults the majority of my life until I was mature enough to realize, hey, it's not mine to carry. You know, and so I feel like this book was like just letting it go.